Life after sudden loss, how we grieve, how we heal, how we find joy, and how we share our most painful truths with others who sometimes don't understand. Hey ladies, I am back, and today I am incredibly grateful for this intimate conversation that you are about to listen to. Before you dive in, I do want to warn you, we are talking about suicide. We are talking about sudden loss. And Kristen is a client of mine who found me through her through the podcast. This conversation goes beyond motherhood. This conversation is about grief. This conversation is about being human. This conversation is about faith. This conversation is about how we can support people who are going through a grief or a loss process. And the reason why I wanted to showcase Kristen is, one, I just think she's an amazing, beautiful soul, and she has a story to tell. And I know that when we tell our stories, not only do we heal, but we can also help other people heal. So I think it's really important that if you listen to today's conversation, to be a part of Kristen's healing process, and email her directly. She's not really active online. She's, your everyday woman, but she does provide her email address, and I'm going to gift it to you now. And she also provides it at the end of our conversation. So it's a Gmail, and it's kx2ax5@gmail.com. So after listening to the conversation, if you feel inspired to reach out to her, you're welcome to do that. Again, if you don't want to do that, but you were impacted by today's conversation, I invite you to either text me. You can do that at 313-710-5199, or you can send me a direct message on Instagram at Heather Chauvet. So Kristen talks about her loss with her son, and we talk about how to support others who are grieving loss as well. And I want you to ask yourself, am I uncomfortable to listen to this conversation? Is it something that I want to avoid? Because I think we need to have, as a culture, we need to be having more uncomfortable conversations, because the bigger conversation that we are having here is about mental health, emotional health, men and emotional health. And too often we push things under the rug, or we're making jokes culturally about other people and their coping strategies. We create a cultural narrative, especially for men, that I don't think we give a lot of room and space for. We're expecting them to show up to the table and to, declare how they want to feel. And the personal development industry and emotional health and emotional intelligence and, talking about your emotions, is predominantly a feminine conversation to have. And I think we need to be having more of these conversations with the men in our lives, and to have open discussions about our feelings and how we think. So again, if you were inspired or hit in your heart by this conversation, please reach out to Kristen directly or myself, and I will make sure that she gets it. It takes courage to share our stories. It takes courage to be ourselves. It takes courage to heal from something like this. And I'm just incredibly grateful to have you here to listen to this intimate conversation. All right, Kristen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I am so incredibly grateful to, one, create this space with you today. And before I hit record, we were talking about kind of storytelling versus being the experts. And I think a lot of us, we all have a story to tell. We all have things that happen in our lives. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to put yourself out there and to be seen.
But there's also this kind of inner dialogue that we tell ourselves of like, am I qualified? Or I'm not an expert. And I think it's really, really important to actually hear stories as well without having all these letters behind your name and an expertise on how to physically solve a problem. And I believe in the power of storytelling when we're just speaking our truth with no attachment, no like, I have 5 easy steps for you on how to get through tragedy. And so today I just wanted to give you the microphone and the opportunity to share your story with the world. So I'm just going to give you the virtual mic. And if you could just set us up, let people know who you are and how you found me. And then, we'll go from there.
Okay. So my name is Kristen Cochran. I hit 40 this year and started my midlife crisis, I guess you want to call it. But if you rewind, almost 2.5 years, my husband and I, we have 5 children. And 2.5 years ago, our oldest son, Austin, committed suicide on June 20th of 2019. No history of mental health issues, no history of depression that we knew of. We told people that if he hadn't sent us a note, we would have thought somebody came and murdered him. So just completely out of the blue. Fast forward from that, probably almost 2 years. I had found my footing to some degree, knew I was turning 40 and knew I needed to do something. And so that sort of is what led me to Heather and the program, because you lose yourself as a stay-at-home parent a lot of time. And then as a stay-at-home parent, one of your sole jobs is to literally keep your children alive. And in my lowest of lows, I questioned my ability to do that because obviously I didn't in my mind at that point. And so not only finding myself as a stay-at-home parent, but finding myself as somebody who lost a child. There are clubs for widows. There are clubs for orphans. But there is no word or club for people who lose children. And so it's a very lonely club. And so knowing 40 was coming and having had this traumatic loss, I found my footing and decided it was time to find me. And so in that, I feel like doing something with Austin's loss needed to be part of that. You don't want to have a loss and you want to make something of that loss, I guess. And mental health is something that is rarely talked about, it seems, especially with young men. I think it's one of the leading causes of boys 18 to 24. And Austin was just over the 18, almost 19 mark. And so, but yes, my husband and I, we've been married for almost 20 years. We also have 4 other kids, Aiden, Ainsley, Archer, and Adelaide. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell. We go on and on about the rest of us in a whole nother story because it's a zoo at my house. But yeah, so.
Thank you. I remember one of the first conversations we had, and that statement that you just made again was really what hit home to me, which was about, my job was a stay-at-home mom, and I felt like I failed. And beyond that, I think as a woman in general, culturally, it's, we're the nurturers. And if anything deviates from that, it crushes identity. And that's from own personal experience or your experience, but not even talking about grief, which is a completely different layer. But in this conversation, I want to talk about your son. Who was he? I want celebration of his soul, how he, went into the world and kind of what he represented. And then in hindsight, because you said nothing is off the table.
Right.
In hindsight, could you see red flags? Was there anything going on there? And and then we'll see where the conversation goes.
Okay. So Austin was a giant. Austin was 8.5 pounds, 23 inches long. His feet were so big that they needed 2 ink pads to ink them. I think he was born wearing a size 3 shoe. When he died, his shoe size was a 16. So, I mean, he was a giant as a baby. And then when he died, he was 6'2", 220 pounds, but a teddy bear. He loved fiercely. He was always smiling. He was a picker-upper, a hugger, a bucket filler for anybody who has read the book about that.
That is the best book ever.
It is. And he was a bucket filler. During his viewing, we had patients. He was a phlebotomist at our hospital locally. He had patients come just to tell me how he took the time to talk to them and to hear their story, and just the love and the virtual hugs, that he gave people. And that was Austin. Austin was always, if I was in a bad mood, he knew my love language was service. And so he would just clean. My husband would walk in and, what do you clean? I don't know, mom's in a bad mood, but I'm going to clean because, that makes mom happy. So he always seemed to put others before himself. So yeah, he, red flags. I mean, that could be one, you always have a healthy and unhealthy side of things. So you can love to a healthy degree and you can love to an unhealthy degree, and so hindsight, I mean, he was 18, he had moved out, a couple months before, didn't know he would even be when he grew up, but didn't just, he wore a mask, I guess you could call it. Some people refer to it as a mask because, he and I were best friends and I didn't see it, on the home front. He got into some trouble as far as he got a DUI. And so I swooped in. We didn't bail him out because that's a rule with our kids. We'll be there. We'll be the go-between, for that. And I was the go-between for him and the bailman, whatever it's called. I don't know. But so we got him and he came out and he hugged me and he thanked me. And I said, I don't know what's going on. Your dad and I don't know what's going on, but we're taking you home. And we brought him home that night. I said, tomorrow we'll go to your apartment. We'll get all your things. We're going to bring you home because we didn't know what was going on. It was such a out of character, activity for him. And he just cried and thanked me because I don't even think he knew what was going on, but had him home and things went back to normal. He went to work. He was helpful around the house. He was good with the rest of the kids. And then the day before he died, he was accused of stealing something, and he was fired. And so, again, 2 completely out of character behaviors for him. Obviously, something underlying. We still don't know to this day. But I guess those would be the red flags after the fact, But I'm a nurse. My husband's a nurse. And so when you piece apart the day, he had ate breakfast. His favorite show was on the television, had plans to go with his friends. That he died on a Thursday, the following Thursday. So not traditional characteristics of somebody who had been contemplating taking their life for a long period of time, but boys are more impulsive than girls. And so, neither here nor there. He had friends, he had good friends, so there weren't a lot of red flags except for those really 2 acute incidences leading up to that day. And so, but up until then, I couldn't tell you what was going through his head. I would like to think he was the most loved child of all the childs in the world, and I love all my children the same amount, but just differently, and so I believe that I would have done, I don't think I would have done anything differently knowing what I knew then. Up until now. Yeah. So of course, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah. And I think this is a really important conversation, especially, we're having this conversation in 2021. I have a lot of friends and colleagues who work in frontline or healthcare, and it's a very different conversation when you are in your tiny little bubble. I feel like unless you have been personally affected by someone who has mental health, You don't know, and you can be judgmental, or you can project, or you can say they had it all, or it looked good, or whatever that is. But we never really know what's going on in someone's inner reality. And I also, what I'm hearing you say is, I think as mothers, we hold a lot of responsibility for other people's health, whether it's mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, and that, we are a guide, or my belief is we're a guide, we're a caregiver, but we are not them, and we cannot do it all. And so where do we stop and they begin? Right. So, are you open to sharing what the message he left? You mentioned, or the gist of it, I think it was before we hit record, you said if there wasn't a letter, we would have assumed something happened to him.
Yeah. So that morning I had taken our daughter Ainsley to the doctor. She had broken out in poison ivy. And so I had to rush her to the doctor, not rush her, but ran her to the doctor because I had a break in the day. And then we stopped to do something, and I get a text message from Austin as I was driving home, telling us what he was about to do. Had he not sent that message, we thought, we would be sure that somebody murdered him, because he died by a gunshot wound. And so, and there was nothing else. There was no, the house was as if he had just walked out of it. There was no preparations. There was no written note, anything like that. He just sent a text message. And so, it was that shocking, I think. And having been in groups, grief groups have been a big part of our healing journey. And I've been in various ones. And a lot of the suicide specific grief groups hold parents who have children who have histories of mental health. And so a lot of their statements were, I knew it was coming. I just didn't know when. And I felt very out of place because I couldn't share that sentiment. I didn't know it was coming. I could have never known it was coming. And so if you had told me one of my 5 children were going to do it, it would not have been Austin. And so I think that made it even more traumatic. I don't know how much more traumatic it could get, but that threw me completely off guard. And so yeah, we definitely would have thought that. So
again, I think it's so, so important that this conversation is like, life is precious, and it's very unpredictable. Now, also, let's talk about grief, because I'm sure people say things to you all the time that, you could read it in a book, and the ridiculous things people say to you.
Write a book. Things you should not say to parents who have lost a child, or things you shouldn't say at the funeral of parents who lost a child.
Yeah. It's like, how about just don't say anything? Just, and I know people mean well, but they say things that you're like, okay, yeah, don't do that. So, strength. Where does that come from to wake up every morning and to keep going when your life is shattered?
Strength. Faith carried us a lot. Mm-hmm. And I believe having my other children helped me get up, a lot of the mornings, and then my husband. So one of the things people like to share statistics, statistics on, when you lose a child to suicide, their siblings have a much higher risk of copying. Statistics show, somebody told me, and I have not verified it, but it's a consistent number, that 74% of marriages in divorce when you lose a child. I think age plays a role in that. And I think the younger they are, the higher the statistic. But everybody likes to share those things. So one of the first things Ken and I did, Austin hadn't even been taken away from the house, was we got down and prayed, and we committed to each other that anything that we were harboring against each other at that point was gone, and that we weren't going to let that statistic define us. So I think that commitment, my other children, and I don't know. I mean, in the early part, I think, so grief, you talk about grief and people, there are stages, there aren't stages, and everybody has an opinion, but shock is one of the stages of grief people claim. And I do believe that shock is a form of protection from, God in my spiritual journey, because there is no way that you could stand at the head of your child and hug his classmates who are all adults, but kids to me, 18 is still a child to me. You don't do that without some type of supernatural strength. And then I don't, I think sometimes there's a core, you have that core part of your brain that's buried deep down that literally breathes for you, beats your heart for you, pumps your blood for you. I think that plays a role in it to some degree,
Mm-hmm.
And then it starts wearing off. The shock wears off, I say, around months 2 and 3, because that's when the people start disappearing and stop asking you how you are. And then you have to sit with it, And so I don't know, strength, faith, my spouse or your person, I know there are people that do this without a spouse, and I can't imagine, people tell me I can't imagine losing a child. I'm like, I can't imagine losing a spouse, or both. And so I think faith, my spouse and my best friend, and my kids in the early parts kept me going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you find, I find anyone that has experienced grief, which I think we all have in some varying degrees. And then of course, the more close to home or traumatic it is, there's just different levels of it. And you do go into like a primal state where you're like, you can't explain it. And sometimes it just hits you, you're having a good day. And then all of a sudden it's like, boom, you're numb or something. There's a trigger that happens. But like you said, I do believe it is very protective, and you can't like will your way out of it or run your way out of it or scream your way out of it. Like the body is very, very wise, and it's there to protect you. And I want to talk about the through line. I do want to get into young men and boys and mental health. And this is something that, I'm raising 3 boys, but my target market that I talk to is women, and women and men are wired very differently. And every time I say something, I'm like, oh, women, my husband always says to me, and men too, humans. And they process very differently, but culturally we are not really, the projection is that like, emotion is weakness. But I'm curious if you're open to talking a little bit about how because I know we chatted about this tiny, tiny bit when you first joined me, you and your husband have been grieving differently.
Right.
And what that looks like.
Yeah. So for us, funny enough, men tend to put on a brave face and, go about their day, and women, tend to be the emotional ones, statistically or stereotypically speaking. It has been opposite for us. I kept waiting for the breakdowns. I kept waiting for the sob fest. I kept waiting, and my husband was much more open with his grief. And I feel he got stuck in the anger phase though, because one of the catchphrases was Cochran's don't quit, and you don't make your mom cry. Those are the 2 rules. And so he just got stuck on those, with Austin. And hindsight, wow, what a hard statement. Cochran's don't quit. So now we're like, Cochran's try. We don't say Cochran's don't quit, because that's such an isolating, limiting statement. So now it's, Cochran's will try, and you still don't make your mom cry. So because it's hard to make me cry, and I've always been that way. But yeah, I processed it. I just got that grief list out, the shock, the denial, the anger, the acceptance, the bargaining, and I went through that in my mind. As long as I was moving through each of those, even if I moved through them all, in the same day, I felt like I was doing okay. Ken got stuck in the anger. And so we learned that nothing is off limits. Feelings are not off limits in our house. And they weren't really before. I mean, we would argue in front of the kids, and I don't mean knock down, drag out, but like I grew up, my parents didn't talk for 10 years, and that was normal. I didn't know they were not doing anything else either. They were just angry at each other. That's just what I grew up with. So when Ken and I disagree, we also make up in front of the kids, but we wanted them to see what a healthy relationship is. It's not always happy. It's not always quiet, and so now the kids, we tell them like, are you angry? Yeah. Okay. What do you want to do about it? We've gone to rage rooms. We've had one of our kids takes a bat to a tree, because he just wants to hit on something. And within, the healthy, unhealthy, nothing is off limits. All of our kids have done it differently. And the same has gone for Ken and I, which is crazy because you would think that I would think that I would be more, I don't know, tearful. You have these expectations that media and life set up for you. And when you don't meet them, you literally feel like you're failing. And so we have kind of taken away that stereotype in our house, and we talk about it. So when you have 6 more people in a house, everybody's going to be on a different grief level that day. Even today, 2.5 years later, because Addery and Archer are both 6 and 7. So they were 4 and 5 when Austin died. And so they are very matter of fact. Austin used to throw me really high in the pool. Yeah. Where is Austin? Oh, he's dead, and we're like, oh, but I'll be having a good day. Ainsley will be having a bad day. Aiden's having an day. We call it griefish. How are you feeling today? Griefish. Okay. That's all you got to say, And so yeah, we've taken that, the stereotypes off of us because you're setting yourself up to fail if you don't cry enough, if you don't laugh enough, if you laugh too much, if you cry too much, and everybody wants to inject their opinion on, you should be over it by now, or things should be getting better by now, or everything happens for a reason, and you have to take those things and throw them out the window. The other thing you do is you assume that they mean well, because that does in my case, I assume that they mean well when they're trying to share that with me. And then I move on because people want to fix you. Grief is uncomfortable, and they either run away and disappear, or they have to say things because they want to fix you, and you can't, you can't fix that part in them. And so you assume that the words they're saying are just love, no matter what the words are. You take it as love and you move on. So.
Yeah, I truly believe that our capacity to hold the person in front of us and their everything, like their emotions, their grief, their sadness, their happiness, their joy, their tantrums, their everything, their existence, and just hold it and be like, I see you, I hear you, I'm not judging you. Right. And then say, thank you for sharing. And then you go on. Like, that is such a beautiful feeling where you're like, I was held and I didn't, because it's awkward when you're sitting there with a person who's trying to fix you. And then all of a sudden you have somehow become their fucking counselor. Yes. When you're the one grieving and you're like, holy shit, I feel like I just got emotionally manipulated. I'm the one that's supposed to be grieving, and now I'm the one telling them it's okay.
Okay. Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, and it's uncomfortable to me. Like when Ken will cry and I'm like, okay, what do you need? Because we're all different, right? When we had a friend who lost her husband unexpectedly, and people are calling me like, what do I do? And I'm like, I don't know, but if you take them food, take them paper plates and silverware, because nobody wants to wash dishes when they're burying their, you go into the what can I do? I'm like, and then don't say anything. Please don't say anything. Tell them that you love them, give them a hug, give them your phone number, but don't, if you don't know how to comfort them, don't try to comfort them, because in that, not everybody accepts those words like I do, because I have a group of women, we've all lost children, and we could write a book on the things you should or shouldn't say when you're at your child's, funeral, or when you're dropping off, but the last thing we want to do is return a glass casserole dish, in the middle of the grief. And so, one of my girlfriends had somebody call her and they're like, I need to take a casserole to another funeral. Do you think I could get that casserole dish back from you? I'm just like, yeah, add that to the list. So when I deliver food, it's in foil, pan.
Or something you don't want back.
Right. And Costco size packages of paper plates and silverware and napkins. Our girlfriend, somebody got her toilet paper. I'm like, that's genius. Because the last thing you want to do is leave your house, And so I'm like, think about it on that aspect, because I can't tell you. People showed up and did my laundry. People cleaned my house. People mowed my lawn. Those were some of the greatest gifts, only because I didn't have to think. Just don't make me think. So, yeah.
The worst, I always tell people, don't ask people, I'm here if you need anything. Like, less talking, more doing.
Right.
And if you have that feeling of like, I need to give, and I don't know what to do, like, you cannot go wrong with a gift certificate. You cannot go wrong with cash. You cannot go wrong with food. And please, for the love of everything, set your ego and your neediness aside to seek validation that you need a thank you from that person.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do it with complete non-attachment.
Right. So we live in the South now. I grew up in California, and in the South, they're very big on thank you notes and stuff like that. And one of our friends who lost somebody sent out a message on Facebook apologizing for not sending thank you notes. And I'm like, wouldn't even have crossed my mind. And I'm sorry that I didn't thank you, but don't make the person feel bad that they didn't say thank you in one of their lowest moments, give them the benefit of the doubt that they appreciated it. And, and I mean, and we did see a lot of them, and I thanked people 2.5 years later, but the expectations that are set upon people because, they were raised that way, and listen, if that makes you feel good, that's great too, but just send things or do things without expectation. I think, like you said, don't sign up on the meal train and say, please call this restaurant and put in your order and I'll pay for it, because that's just giving them something else to do. And you're getting the credit for doing that. That's my opinion, do something else. If you can't order the food, like you said, send a gift certificate. Or my response is, if you see a need, fill it.
Yeah.
If you see that the grass needs mowed, I have teenage boys. I'm going to send them over and let them mow the grass. If you see, in our friend's case, she lost her husband. She has a need for a babysitter. And so we're going to send our daughter over there on a Saturday night and say, you're going to go out, even if it's just to go for a run, whatever you want. And here's our child. She's going to watch her kids and keep them alive and breathing. And, those mean so much more, than anything you could do, I think, because you're seeing a need. And as women, I find we don't ask for help anyway. When's the last time, you tell somebody, you just call me if you need something? Have they ever called you when they needed something before? Even when they're drowning, they're definitely not going to know it now, because you don't want to open that. I didn't want to bring people into our world. It was so painful, and I saw how, again, going into that role of taking care of other people, I saw how uncomfortable it was. And I don't want to subject to them, that. And people would say, I can't imagine how you're feeling. I don't want you to imagine how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
I don't. That's the worst thing, imaginable. And so I don't want to open this can of worms up for you. So yeah. Yeah.
And assertiveness skills really help here. Like I've said to friends, I'm doing this. You cannot take no as the answer. Like my children are coming over to cut your grass and, oh, no, it's okay. And I'm like, shut up. They're coming.
Right.
And then I'm like, done. Oh, what can I give you? And I'm like, stop asking. Like, I'm just very assertive and almost to the point where it's like aggressive. Right. And because I understand that you have to rise above, you have to use the assertiveness skills. And so when you feel like you're shrinking, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do. You really just have to like rise above and really show up for other people. And that means not making their lives more difficult. Decision fatigue is a really big thing. And what I'm also heard you say is, I could hear you say a little bit like you were trying to protect other people from your grief. Like you're not going to openly invite people into your grief. And I'm someone who, would put my phone away and like go in the woods, and everyone's trying to get at me to for their own need. Right. And I'm just like, I don't need any of this right now. Like, I just want to be left alone. Right. So it is personal, and yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about men and mental health.
Okay.
I feel like coming slowly culturally. I get a lot of questions from my community and also clients who are married or in partnership with men. Mm-hmm. And, oftentimes when they're making changes or they're doing things and they're getting like, not a rebuttal, but like a resistance, and they're like, why is this happening? Why is that happening? I'm like, he's uncomfortable too. There's fear, there's overwhelm, there's lots of things. And they're traditionally bred to be protectors, providers, and all of that. So it's going to show up differently. But mental health is a real thing for every human being that is walking on this earth. And traditionally, I see a lot of female spokeswomen who are talking about it. So yeah, boys and men need support as well. So I'm just curious your perspective on this.
So getting men to talk is difficult. We have, I think I mentioned a local group. So it's called the Page Group, People Actively Growing Emotionally. It was originally started for AA recovery. And then there was actually a husband and wife in it that would fight constantly. And so the creator said, okay, I'm going to make another group, and the husband's not invited. It became a women's group, and it became a women's. So that was Page Group 2. And then we became Page Group 3, which was a traumatic loss, because I want to clarify, and I should have done it sooner. Grief is grief. If the biggest loss you've had in your life is your dog, that grief is going to be painful. And so I don't ever want anybody to feel like I'm undermining their grief because my grief is more griefish, no, because grief is grief. But traumatic grief tends to bring up different struggles, it seems, in talking, to sit in a group of women who, like my mother, my dad died. He had a massive heart attack. But, so she lost my dad, but it was a natural progression. He was 70 years old. And so her grief journey looks very differently than my grief journey. It's still grief. It's still painful. And she's still going to hit those milestones that are traditional, but mine is different. And so men are the same. So we tried to start a men's group, and they literally just stare at one another. They won't talk. I'm fine, and so I do hard things on hard anniversaries. So for Austin's birthday, I went hiking in Moab, Utah, backpacking. And then for his death anniversary this year, I went to Idaho and went backpacking in the Sawtooth Mountains. And so Ken, my husband, was struggling. He's in healthcare and he's in leadership, and he was struggling with losing his fire, his passion, his desire. And I think he was getting angry at me because I found a way to harness that. And he didn't know what to do with it. Nobody wanted to talk to him because men don't talk, right? And so he just started forcing those conversations with people. And so now he has a coworker who lost a spouse, and they may only be, "Hey, how are you?" "I'm okay today." "Me too." But that's an open window for him. But he has tried to restart the men's group. And again, finding that when they're busy, men are busy, he finds they tend to talk more. So, and then he found almost 50 Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And so I'm like, you're crazy.
What's the eye roll? What's the eye roll?
Because he's almost 50, he's had a total knee replacement, but he thrives on competition and he couldn't compete anymore. And so that was his therapy. And because he didn't feel he had a competitive edge anymore, he was losing himself. So he lost his son, who he feels like he didn't protect, right? Same thing as me. And then his ability to change the world, because that's what my husband does. He feels like he has to change the world. And so he found it, and people are like, he's crazy. I'm like, but he's happy and he's got passion again. And the man that runs the program, he lost his son to a murder. His son was the same age as Austin. And so he found a community. So it can't be forced with men like it is with women. Women can talk to anyone, a lot of women. I'm an introvert, so I'm exhausted after my weekly grief group. But I mean, a lot of women, they can talk about it openly, and men can't. And so for my husband, community. For my son, Aiden, he won't go to a counselor unless I can find him a man who has lost his brother to a gunshot wound due to suicide. I mean, he's laid it out flat blank, plain. He doesn't want to talk to them because they have nothing in common. So what I'm hearing is he needs a community. So he and Ainsley go to a biweekly grief group where there are other kids similar to age who have lost somebody, and in this group, fortunately, and I know that sounds sad, there are other boys who have lost their siblings this way. And so Aiden has somebody to relate to. So community, I think creating a community where you feel safe, because men are vulnerable and they won't admit it. I think being around other people who feel the same way as you, it kind of takes those walls down, I guess. Mm-hmm. So that's what we have found, because I don't know how to fix the other side of it. Everybody, wants to fix suicide. Unfortunately, you can't speak to the people who have completed, because they're not here with us, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm not an expert in completing that. I can tell you for my son, the phone numbers didn't work. The text messaging didn't work. And so I don't know what's going to work on that side. But on the survival side and the giving my surviving children the best chances I get, I think community, that seems to be the most successful, because I was Oprah. When it first happened, I was like, you get therapy and you get therapy and you get counseling and you get counseling and because we didn't, what else do you do, Yeah. And our daughter, Ainsley, does really well with that. Aiden, no. Individual counseling for me, I didn't find help because I didn't know what to work on. But for me, grief group. So I meet grief group. And then when the kids meet, the parents and caretakers meet, and we have our own little, powwow. And then for Ken, community. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is a really important conversation because whether it's grief or any aspect of your life, I think culturally we've been taught, go to therapy. Mm-hmm. And then when that doesn't work, we don't know what else to tell you. And so you have to, there's so many aspects, and it's also surprising, right? It happens and you're like, whoa, I didn't know that I was going to react that way. But don't stop looking, right? Find your thing and pay attention to how that makes you feel. And, whether you're doing a martial art and you're connecting, just keep at it. Right. Keep at it. And there's something else that you said that I just want to like point out of like the correlations, which is shared experience. That's really, really important for respect and credibility. So like you said, your son, he's like, the counselor has to be this, right? Which is, they understand. They're like, I've been in your shoes. You're not, because then there's no trust, there's no respect, there's no accountability, which I think is why we need to storytell. We need to tell our stories because there are other people out there that are like, I've been waiting for you to show up. I've been waiting for you to show up. And I've had people in my life like that too, where, you know, I've tried, I've looked, and then it was just something about that person, their story, the way that they showed up in the world. And I was like, you're my person for this. And I think that's why we all have something to share.
Yeah. I mean, and you mentioned the first thing people say is go to therapy. If that's the first time somebody mentioned to you, then we are making strides in mental health, because the way I grew up, I lost a sister at a young age. It was stuffing, you know, I mean, in the US, you get 3 bereavement days. I mean, you have an unsympathetic boss, you get 3 bereavement days, and then it's back to work. And I mean, that is not healthy. I mean, you can't even plan a funeral, have a funeral, and recover from a funeral in that amount of time. And so yeah, I mean, go to therapy, but if that therapist doesn't work, go to another one.
Yeah.
If that therapist doesn't work, go to a different one or try a different technique, and that's exhausting in and of itself. You know, there are days where I can't make phone calls still, and we're 2.5 years into this. So that's when you step in and you give yourself grace. You write that down and say, tomorrow I'm going to finish up on this. I'm not going to keep doing it today, you know? And so yeah. But to speak to other people, so to have the rug pulled out under me, because I thought I was a really good stay-at-home mom. I was killing it. You know, I was doing all the things, and I was taking them all the places, and I was loving them, and I was, you know, doing the 8-second hugs and all this. And then to have that pulled out from under me completely shook who I was and how I did it. So to connect to other people who have lost in a similar way, even farther down the road, you know, they even just looking at them, they don't even have to say anything, just looking at them and going, okay, they're still here, you know, 2, 4, 6 years later. Okay. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Connecting to people with similar stories. I think that's important.
Yeah. What keeps coming up for me in this conversation, for whatever reason, was I never realized I was 12 years old. My first death was by suicide as a child.
Wow.
Yeah. That was the first funeral I attended, and it was my sister's boyfriend.
Wow.
Yeah.
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 What a young age to experience that kind of trauma. Mm-hmm. And, you know, whether it was explained to you or was it hushed away, because, you know, we have people who still came and reassured me that Austin was going to go to heaven because that wasn't a sin anymore. You know, so that tells me that people still harbor that mindset, you know, and so that long ago for you, you know, how was it handled? How was it addressed? How was it not normalized, but, you know, help you understand it, you know? I mean, because I don't even know that we do a good enough job now, you know?
I feel like at a younger age, I can feel like the emotion coming up. I feel like at a younger age, I don't want to say we're more accepting of death, but, you know, experiencing as an adult, I think your brain has definitely, you have ego, and your brain you take on more responsibility, where I had more curiosity and I didn't even know that I was being traumatized.
Right.
But in hindsight, there was a moment the last time I saw him where he was saying goodbye to me. Like I knew. Not that I knew in the moment as a child, but like in hindsight as the child, when my father came and told me, I was like, oh yeah, like he was legit saying goodbye to me last time I saw him. And he was perceived to be a happy, very happy person. And as I got older, I realized it's not that these people aren't quote unquote happy, because I was one of those children as a teenager. we're highly sensitive. Our heart is wide open and we feel so much. And this is why we need kindness and compassion and, to do our work as humans, because we never know who we're meeting and what they're meeting. And I've watched how that trauma has trickled in our family and how my sister has never recovered from it. And it breaks my heart because you see the trauma and, Yeah.
And I mean, that perpetuates the anger towards the person who completed, for some people, because, our son Aiden is struggling and would he still be struggling like this if Austin hadn't done what Austin did? Mm-hmm. But I believe that something flipped in his brain at that moment that made him do what he chose to do. We call it a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I don't believe he would have done that if he was in his right mind. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that he thought about all of us and thought, was worried. I don't, that's because he wouldn't have done it, so something has to be, mechanically wrong. And so, but I think the younger you are, I grieve for all of the things that he will never experience. And probably even for me, I grieve that I will never have a daughter-in-law to love from him. And I grieve that I will never have grandchildren from him to love. And I grieve that he won't get to be an uncle because he's amazing with babies, And so as an adult, you grieve all the things that you knew they had coming, right? Mm-hmm. And as a child, you haven't lived those things. So when my sister died, she was sick her whole life. I just rolled with it, and then growing up in a family of stuffers, we just stuffed it away, okay, your sister's dead. Now we move on. Right. And so, it changes the story, I think, for you as you get older. And it does impact your life. I believe, learning more about childhood trauma. And, I sit and I think, I didn't have a traumatic childhood. I had great parents. They loved me. Yeah. But you also lost, your sister and a grandpa that helped raise you and this all within a 2-year period of time. That's a lot of loss, and if it's not addressed properly, how does that affect your loss? And I wasn't faith-based at that age. I wasn't a faith goer. I didn't go to church. And so I didn't have faith to lean on. And so coming forward, I grieved differently because I understand, in my opinion, what afterlife looks like. And so then I developed guilt for being content because I knew it's just this whole, and then it impacts how you, interact with other people and how you raise your children. And it just compounds on top of one another. And so, I think there needs to be more support for the people who survive too, because, that dropping that stone in the lake and the ripple effect, that is a classic example of loss like this. Austin's death created a ripple effect that, depending on how we handle it, can impact negatively, positively, or both the rest of everybody's lives. He has people I didn't even know who reach out to me to let me know that, they were on a path that was going the wrong way and his death made them go on a path. I don't even know these people, mm-hmm. And so that makes my heart happy because, my husband and I say, if we can save one life, that's all it takes, because one life is important. One life is important. Nothing you can do is menial, small or unimportant, even if it just saves one life. So,
Thank you. I know, I just looking at the time, like we could probably talk all day. And I'm incredibly grateful to have this conversation with you. So thank you for saying yes.
Thanks for having me.
And anyone who's listening, I want you to be able to you could probably just reach out to me unless you have contact information and they can reach out to you. But I want to know, go ahead. What were you going to say?
They can reach out to me. I have, email, phone number.
What's your email if they want to reach out to you?
kx2ax5@gmail.com.
Perfect. So I'll say that again in the intro, and we'll have it in the show notes. And again, if people want to reach out to me based on this conversation, you're welcome to do that. And I will forward it to Kristen as well. You can send me a message on Instagram at Heather Chauvin. And thank you so much. And I think in this conversation, what I walk away with, and just, the connections that, the conversation that you and I have been having, is you don't need to know the big picture. Just share. Just share and see where it takes you. And I think too often we get in our head about trying to be perfect or trying to know exactly what to say. And it's like, just share, open the conversation, open the circle, and create those connections. So thank you, Kristen.
Thanks for having me.